Stevenson now 56 minutes, 3:55 for Lakeshore Drive, 40 from the Tri-State. Ryan, 25 minutes, 95 to downtown. I-57, 27 minutes, 90 for the merge. Bishop Ford, 46. Northbound Tri-State is knotted up from Cicero to Harlem with a stall in the right lane, and it's heavy Plainfield Road to 47. I'm Jim Talamonte on AM 560 The Answer.
Chicago's Morning Answer continues next in our 1-hour heating and air conditioning weather center. Windy and cooler today, high 52, 45 at O'Hare with gusty winds. Next news at 7, Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560 The Answer.
Watch today's show live right now on the Income Store live video stream at 560theanswer.com.
See Michelle Malkin, Sean Hannity, and Laura Logan at Freedom Summit 2019. Tickets on sale now at freedomsummitchicago.com.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Several of the Democrat socialists were quite exercised about Trump's withdrawal of U.S. troops from northern Syria, and they made their feelings known on the debate stage last evening, starting with Vice President Joe Biden.
Would you send American troops back into northern Syria to prevent an ISIS resurgence and protect our Kurdish allies?
I would not have withdrawn the troops, and I would not have drawn the additional 1,000 troops who are in Iraq, which are in retreat now, being fired on by Assad's people, and the President of the United States saying, if those ISIS folks escape from the prisons they're in, they'll only go to Europe and won't affect us. It has been the most shameful thing that any president has done in modern history, excuse me, in terms of foreign policy. And the fact of the matter is, I've never seen a time. And I've spent thousands of hours in the Situation Room. I've spent many hours on the ground in those very places in Syria and in Iraq. And guess what? Our commanders across the board, former and present, are ashamed of what's happening here. What I would do is I would be making it real clear to Assad that, in fact, he's going to have a problem because Turkey is the real problem here. And I would be having a real lockdown conversation with Erdogan and letting him know that he's going to pay a heavy price for what he has done. Now, pay that price.
Just to clarify, Mr. Vice President, would you want American troops back in northern Syria?
I would want those 1,000 troops to be protected by air cover, those 1,000 troops that are having to withdraw under fire, make it clear that they're not going anywhere, and have them protected, and work my way back toward what in fact needs to be done, protecting those Kurds. They lost their lives. This is shameful, shameful what this man has done.
So Biden said he would return U.S. troops to northern Syria and have a real tough talk with Turkish President Erdogan. Sounds like a business opportunity for Hunter.
Yeah, it does.
Tough talk with Erdogan. Well, sanctions are being imposed or threatened. There is a détente contingent led by Vice President Pence that has
Pompeo's
been dispatched. Okay. All right. So there's one perspective. Another came from Kamala Harris, who had to get her refrigerator magnet slogan in during the debate at some point. So she picked the commander-in-chief issue to do so.
What has happened in Syria is yet again Donald Trump selling folks out. And in this case, he sold out the Kurds, who, yes, fought with us and thousands died in our fight against ISIS. And let's be clear, what Donald Trump has done because of that phone call with Erdogan is basically giving 10,000 ISIS fighters a get-out-of-jail-free card. And you know who the winner is in this? There are four: Russia, Iran, Assad, and ISIS. This is a crisis of Donald Trump's making, and it is on a long list of crises of Donald Trump's making, and that's why dude gotta go, and when I am commander-in-chief, we will stop this madness.
Dude gotta go.
Dude gotta go.
KamalaHarris.org to get your T-shirt or some such website.
She doesn't say selling. She's like selling. I'm telling you, she spoke differently last night.
She's so accessible and yet so forceful. I'm impressed. For more on the substance of the topic, we're pleased to be joined by Seth Frantzman. He's an op-ed editor and Middle East affairs analyst at the Jerusalem Post. He's also the author of the book, After ISIS, America, Iran, and the Struggle for the Middle East. Seth, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hi, good morning.
Morning. So Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, mainly Biden, but we'll throw Kamala Harris in there as well, They're right to be as outraged as they were last night on that debate stage.
Well, I mean, I think that the talking points they had are right in a sense. I mean, there's a bit of grandstanding because I don't think once you've let the kind of horse out of the corral and you've decided to leave a place and all these other groups are rushing in, I actually don't see them, if they were in charge, actually necessarily going in there and doing much. I think there are certainly questions to be asked about what happened on October 6th and why the decision in this case wasn't, laid out 6 months ago, in which the U.S. could, work with Turkey and or talk to the Assad regime or even and tell the Kurds and be straight with them. Listen, we fought together, but at some point, the U.S. has decided to leave. So I think it would have been better had this whole thing been managed a lot better.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's an easy talking point in terms of on that stage last night saying, okay, well, we'll ride back in and we'll defend the Kurds.
Yeah, but things have changed since we've pulled out. And who are the Kurds turning to for help? Or are they just getting slaughtered?
They've been bombarded with airstrikes by Turkey. Mm-hmm. And so they said, if we have to choose between being slaughtered and genocide and have to choose between that and the Assad regime, which is the devil that we know in terms of the former regime, so we'll sign some sort of a deal with them which will create some sort of a buffer in which the airstrikes will stop and the Turkish invasion will stop. So that's kind of the hard place that they were put in. We have to remember this is a really big area. I think the area in eastern Syria is almost the size of the Kingdom of Jordan. It's about the size of West Virginia or something like that, or New Jersey. So, this is a very big piece of landscape that the United States, with just 1,000 soldiers and about 100,000 Kurds that had been trained, Kurds and Arabs, was actually able to maintain a lot of influence over.
I certainly agree with you about how this could have been managed better and then communicated better when the decision was made. There's no question about that in my mind. But in terms of the explanation that has been given over the last several days by Secretary of Defense Esper as well as Senator Rand Paul, that one of the issues that changed the circumstances that led to this decision is Erdogan saying, we're coming in whether your troops are staying or not. And the concern that, of course, 15,000 Kurdish or something on that order, Kurdish troops were going to easily overrun 50 to 100 American special forces.
Right, but I don't know. I look back to American history. I certainly think that over the last 30 years, when it was George W. Bush or George H.W. Bush or even back to Ronald Reagan, I think in the end of the day, there's a lot of countries that not so long ago would never dare to lay a finger on the U.S. Special Forces. So the fact that Turkey, which is ostensibly a quote-unquote NATO ally, was willing to threaten the United States, I don't think that our allies should ever be threatening us. So, these are Kurdish fighters and also Arabs that signed on and trained with the U.S. and helped to defeat ISIS. So I think if we're going to ask a guy to help us fight ISIS and we're going to train him and give him a rifle and we're going to fight side by side in the trench with him, then when someone else comes along and says, okay, tomorrow I'm going to bomb him, the United States, as a great power, should be able to say, well, no, that's not going to happen. So we need to find a way that other countries, whether it's Turkey or Iran, with Iran, they are not able to put us in this vice of saying that, well, if you don't do this, there's going to be war. I think maybe the United States needs to have an internal conversation about how we deal with that and whether or not we end up, therefore, saying that these countries are countries we can deal with or be allies with.
Yeah, I think that's fair, but here's the thing, and I'm not defending this policy or this history, I'm just describing it. These alliances of convenience where we hopscotch around depending on the geopolitics and the political expedient desires of the moment. Rand Paul, again, made this point. That why we'll never have a vote in the Senate to authorize the use of force is because we don't know who to declare war on. The Syrian Defense Forces were our allies for 7 years. Turkey's a NATO ally. Obviously, the Kurds. So it's real complicated by the complicated choices that have been made by American presidents and presidential administrations over the years. And we see this play out routinely, in particular in the Middle East, but not limited there, Latin America and Central America as well. But you could use the classic case of Saddam Hussein being a former ally until he wasn't in the Iraq-Iran war. So it seems like we play this out, and it's not so particular to this administration.
I think that's right. Look, if we go back to the Saddam Hussein example in 1990, 91, there was something I think called the Bush Doctrine or Powell Doctrine, which is, we need to fight a war, but we need to know exactly what we're trying to do here. So I think, it's about explaining what are we doing, why are we doing it, and when we get into these conflicts, deciding exactly what the U.S. is doing and explaining that to ourselves. So I think that's one aspect. And I think, also being transparent and clear with people that we're working with and saying, okay, listen, in 6 months or a year, we're going to leave. And I'll give you an example with groups that the United States is hostile to. For instance, Hezbollah, which we view as a terrorist organization. When Israel fought a war with Hezbollah in 2006, the U.S. played a role to create a ceasefire. So if the U.S. is able to create ceasefires between its own allies, like Israel, and groups that it hates, like Hezbollah, then I would think it could create a ceasefire between a group that it's a partner with and an ally. So the United States should be, as a global player, able to do that. And I think historically we've been able to do that. So that's a kind of thing that we need to be thinking about as well.
Sure, and that's sort of an underappreciated aspect of this situation between the Turks and the Kurds, too. It's similar to Hezbollah and Israel. These animosities date back 100+ years. I mean, so there's a lot of history there that we're sort of interceding into, and it's complicated because there's not necessarily always a desire for a ceasefire or for détente. And Walter Russell Mead in the Journal had a point about this too, about the limits of U.S. power in the region. He made mention of the protests that are currently shaking Iraq. The U.S. may be the paramount power in the region, writes Mead, but nobody has a solution to the developmental and political crisis that continues to destabilize too many countries across the Middle East.
No, that's exactly right. So the thing is, in Iraq, for instance, what you have Iranian-backed Shia militias that are involved in killing some of these protesters. But in Iraq, we also have a region of Iraq. It also happens to be Kurdish in the northern part of Iraq, which is a U.S. partner and ally in which we have been training people. So you have examples where you say, okay, we'll partner with the part of this country that we want to work with, and we'll try to reduce the influence of other parts. I guess the United States has to have a conversation 30 years after the Berlin Wall fell as to what our role in the world is today, because I think if we remember, I think George Bush Sr. said, there's a new world order. The United States is going to play a kind of role as, global policeman. It's clear that today, I think the American people are not in a place where they want to do that. So I think we need to have a national security policy in which a president reflects on that and decides where do we want to play a role, what parts of the world, like, is it against China with trade war, or do we not want to do that? Where does America want to do things like this?
Well, who's responsible and who's in charge of the 11,000 ISIS prisoners now that the Kurds have left? Well, because that's what a lot of people are concerned about. Are we going to, obviously, is this the rebirth of ISIS?
Well, look, that's another key part of this campaign, which I think we need to look back at, which is, the anti-ISIS war had 80 partners, of which most of them are countries. So how is it that 70 countries or so signed on to fight ISIS, but none of them seem to actually be willing to take a role in terms of dealing with these detainees? Why is it that actually the SDF, which the U.S. was working with, this mostly Kurdish group, was asked to detain all these people and pay for them when there's no money there? Why is it that all these countries that ISIS fighters came from, for instance, 5,000 of them came from Europe, how come none of those countries were willing to do more than just pay lip service? And I think we need to have a real conversation a year ago about, how are we going to manage all these people and whose responsibility is it? It seems to me everyone just wants to say, well, it's not our responsibility. Well, isn't that how ISIS rose in the first place? Because a whole bunch of people said, well, it's not my problem that all these people are becoming radicalized and all of them are going to Syria to fight.
Yeah, it's a interesting point, and it sort of runs headlong into the domestic political climates in the West too, which are over the last couple of years have been increasingly populist and thus increasingly non-interventionist.
Right. So the thing is, if you want to have populist politics, there's nothing wrong with that. The question is, in terms of the ISIS fighter thing, if you have thousands of your citizens who are booking tickets to go fight in a foreign conflict, and then all of a sudden all those people get arrested somewhere, and you say, well, we don't really want to deal with them. I mean, these are your citizens. If they're American citizens, we need to make sure that none of our citizens are joining ISIS, and if they do, they need to face harsh prison sentences, just like we had that guy, John Walker Lynn, remember, that was captured in Afghanistan? I mean, that guy got, 20, 30 years, I think. So, we need to make sure that we have the resources at home in the justice system to prosecute these people. And I think we need to make sure that our quote-unquote European allies are doing the same thing. And I think there's evidence. For instance, France and the UK had special forces in eastern Syria. What are France and the UK doing? I don't see them stepping up to say, okay, we'll help to maintain some of these ISIS facilities or something like that.
Yeah, it's these precedential decisions. Speaking of John Walker Lind, and then on the flip side, you have Bo Bergdahl. Seth Frantzman, he's an op-ed editor and Middle East affairs analyst at the Jerusalem Post. His book, After ISIS, America, Iran, and the Struggle for the Middle East. Seth, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is the morning show more Chicago radio listeners are choosing. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
The Lou Dobbs Financial Report is brought to you by Signature Bank, helping local businesses succeed. Visit signaturebank.bank for your commercial banking needs.
I'm Lou Dobbs. GM CEO joins contract talks.